The applause was still echoing through the elegant ballroom when my husband looked me in the eyes, smiled for the cameras, and announced that ending our 31-year marriage would be the first great victory of his new law firm. For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. Then, in front of more than 200 guests, Richard Brooks placed a thick envelope into my trembling hands as though he were presenting me with an award instead of dismantling my life. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above us, champagne glasses clinked in celebration, and somewhere behind the crowd, someone actually laughed. That was the moment Richard believed he had already won. What he didn't know was that one missing page inside those documents would change everything. The offices of Brooks and Hale Legal Group occupied the 12th floor of a newly renovated building overlooking the Chicago River. Every inch of the place reflected wealth and ambition. Black marble stretched across the floors, modern artwork decorated exposed brick walls, and glass conference rooms gleamed beneath warm designer lighting. 3 years earlier, Richard had been practicing law from a cramped office above a dentist's clinic in Naperville. Back then, success was nothing more than a dream shared across our tiny kitchen table while I reheated leftovers after long workdays at the middle school library. Those nights felt simple. He would loosen his tie, bury his face in legal books, and whisper, "One day I'll make all your sacrifices worth it." I believed every word. Now, surrounded by judges, investors, reporters, and wealthy clients, I barely recognized the man standing across the room. By 7 that evening, the grand opening had become the city's newest networking event. Waiters drifted between guests carrying silver trays of expensive appetizers while soft jazz floated through the office. Conversations about investments and million-dollar developments blended with laughter that sounded practiced instead of genuine. I stood near the refreshment table holding nothing but sparkling water. Lately, alcohol only made the anxiety worse. Across the room, Richard rarely left Vanessa Hale's side. She was younger, polished, effortlessly confident, and carried herself like someone who already belonged beside him. Every smile Richard gave her lingered just a little too long. Every quiet conversation excluded everyone else. Most people never noticed. After 31 years of marriage, I noticed every single one. Our daughter Megan caught my eye from across the room. She forced a reassuring smile, but worry lingered behind it. We'd never spoken openly about Richard's growing distance, yet somehow she understood long before I was willing to admit the truth. At exactly 7:45, Richard tapped a spoon against his champagne glass. The room slowly fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with effortless confidence, "before we continue, I'd like my beautiful wife to join me." A wave of applause swept through the crowd. For one foolish moment, hope returned. Maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe tonight he would remember everything we'd survived together. The sleepless nights while he finished law school. The second job I worked to keep tuition paid. The inheritance from my mother that helped finance his first office. Maybe this public celebration would also become a public thank you. I walked toward the stage. Richard reached for my hand. His fingers felt strangely cold. He smiled at the audience before turning toward me. "Every successful law firm," he announced, "needs one unforgettable negotiation." Polite laughter rippled across the room. Then he looked directly into my eyes. "And tonight," he continued, "that negotiation happens to be my divorce." The room froze. My heart didn't. It became unnaturally calm. Richard handed me the envelope. Camera flashes erupted from somewhere behind the guests. I slowly opened the packet. Legal documents. Already prepared. Already signed. I turned the pages once. Twice. Then my eyes stopped. Something wasn't there. A section I had already seen weeks earlier had disappeared. And in that instant, I realized this wasn't simply the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a battle Richard never expected me to fight. For a long moment, I simply stared at the paperwork while everyone in the room waited for me to fall apart. Some expected tears. Others expected shouting. Richard expected surrender. Instead, my heartbeat slowed. 3 weeks earlier, he'd made a mistake no attorney should ever make. He left his iPad unlocked on our kitchen counter while he went upstairs to shower. I hadn't planned to invade his privacy, but a notification lit up the screen before it locked. A divorce agreement was already open, and my name was right there in the middle of the page. Curiosity became disbelief as I scrolled. The version in my hands tonight wasn't the same one I'd secretly photographed that morning. One entire section had vanished. I lifted my eyes toward Richard. He was smiling for the crowd, but beneath that practiced confidence, tension flickered across his face. He knew exactly what I had noticed. "You don't have to read everything now, Eleanor," he said into the microphone, keeping his voice calm. That sentence confirmed everything. If the missing pages truly didn't matter, he wouldn't have been worried about when I read them. I lowered the papers and asked quietly, "Where's the addendum?" The room went completely silent. Even the musicians stopped playing. Richard's smile stiffened for the briefest moment before he recovered. "This really isn't the place for legal discussions," he replied. I looked around at the guests. "Then why did you decide this was the place to announce our divorce?" Several people shifted uncomfortably. Near the back, Megan slowly placed her drink on a nearby table, never taking her eyes off her father. For the first time that evening, Richard looked less like a confident attorney and more like a man realizing his script wasn't going according to plan. Looking back now, I know our marriage hadn't collapsed overnight. It had been disappearing one small moment at a time. Not with screaming arguments or broken dishes. With silence. With distance. With tiny humiliations that seemed harmless to everyone except the person living through them. I still remember the dinner where Richard corrected my pronunciation of a French wine term in front of his colleagues. Everyone laughed politely. So did I. It was easier than admitting how deeply it hurt. On the drive home, rain slid across the windshield while neither of us spoke. For the first time in decades, he never reached across the console to hold my hand. That silence said more than any argument ever could. We had survived financial struggles, family loss, sleepless nights, and years of sacrifice together. When Richard attended law school, I worked extra shifts at 2 different libraries just to keep food on the table. Some nights I'd find him asleep over his textbooks, still wearing his glasses. I'd cover him with a blanket before quietly washing dishes at midnight. "You believe in me when nobody else does," he'd whispered once. Back then, I believed we were building one future together. I never imagined I was helping build the life he'd eventually push me out of. Success changed him slowly. First came the tailored suits. Then the luxury watches. Soon every conversation revolved around image, influence, branding, and networking. The humble man I'd fallen in love with was slowly replaced by someone obsessed with appearances. Then Vanessa entered the picture. Richard insisted she was simply a brilliant business partner. Maybe that's how it started. But emotional betrayals rarely stay hidden. He laughed differently around her. Listened more carefully. Checked his phone constantly. Even when he sat beside me, his attention belonged somewhere else. The hardest part wasn't losing my husband's affection. It was watching him give it to someone else while pretending nothing had changed. Standing beneath those glittering lights at his grand opening, surrounded by people celebrating the life we'd once dreamed about together, I finally understood something painful. Richard hadn't planned this moment overnight. He had been preparing to erase me for months. And the missing addendum proved he was hiding far more than a simple divorce. Weeks before that humiliating night, the truth had already been sitting in my kitchen, glowing from the screen of Richard's forgotten iPad. I can still remember the sound of the shower running upstairs while I stared at the document, frozen in my chair. The title read, Brooks_Dissolution U_Final_Draft. At first, I expected the usual legal language, property division, retirement accounts, bank statements. Painful, yes, but ordinary. Then I reached the section that changed everything. An attached addendum. Its heading looked harmless enough, but the words underneath made my blood run cold. According to the document, I had become emotionally unstable. It suggested I struggled with sound financial judgment and hinted that my age might be affecting my ability to make responsible decisions. I read the paragraph again. Then a third time. It wasn't just insulting. It was strategic. If I accepted those claims without a fight, Richard could argue that temporary control of our shared assets should remain with him until my condition could be evaluated. My mother's inheritance. Our investment accounts. Even the lake house that had belonged to my family for decades. Everything could slip into his hands while I tried proving I wasn't the woman he had described on paper. I heard the shower stop upstairs. My heart nearly leaped out of my chest. I quickly locked the iPad, placed it exactly where I'd found it, and walked away before Richard came downstairs. He never realized I'd seen a single page. The next morning, I met Megan at a quiet diner not far from the hospital where she worked. She arrived wearing navy blue scrubs, dark circles beneath her eyes after another overnight shift. The moment she sat down, she looked at my face and asked softly, "What happened?" Without saying a word, I slid printed photographs of the addendum across the table. She read every page in silence. When she finished, she looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not sadness. Not disbelief. Anger. "This isn't a normal divorce agreement," she said. "I know. No," she continued, tapping the pages. "This was designed to trap you." The waitress arrived with 2 cups of coffee, but neither of us touched them. Megan leaned closer. "Mom. Dad has been setting this up for months." Hearing someone else say it out loud somehow made it more real. I'd spent weeks convincing myself I was imagining things. The late nights. The changed passwords. The secretive phone calls. The growing distance. Now every piece fit together. "He expects you to panic," Megan said quietly. "And if I do? Then he'll get exactly what he wants." For several seconds, we simply sat there listening to the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Finally, Megan reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're not doing this alone." Those 5 words steadied something inside me. For months, Richard had made me feel invisible. Like I no longer mattered. But my daughter reminded me that I wasn't standing by myself. The following morning, Megan drove me to meet Arthur Bennett. Arthur had practiced law for decades from a modest office above an old hardware store. Unlike Richard's sleek downtown firm, Arthur's office wasn't impressive. The carpet had faded. Books overflowed from wooden shelves. The coffee tasted terrible. Yet somehow, it felt more trustworthy than every marble hallway in Brooks and Hale combined. Arthur listened without interrupting while I explained everything. Then he carefully examined every photograph I'd taken from Richard's iPad. He barely spoke for nearly 10 minutes. Finally, he removed his reading glasses and let out a slow breath. "Your husband isn't preparing for a fair divorce." I figured that much. Arthur nodded. "No. He is preparing for psychological warfare." The word settled heavily between us. "What do you mean?" "He doesn't actually expect this to end in court." I frowned. "Then what does he expect?" Arthur folded his hands across the desk. "He expects embarrassment to do the work for him." I looked down at the photographs. "He knows you." Arthur's voice remained calm. "He knows you've spent your entire life avoiding public conflict. He believes that if he humiliates you in front of enough witnesses, you'll sign almost anything just to escape the moment." My chest tightened. Because Arthur was right. If Richard had done this a year earlier, I probably would have signed. Not because I agreed. Because I couldn't have endured becoming the center of such public humiliation. Arthur leaned forward. "But manipulative people almost always make one mistake." I looked up. "They become so confident in their own plan that they overlook the smallest details." He tapped the missing addendum. "And that's exactly what your husband just did." At that moment, I realized something Richard never imagined. He believed he was writing the ending of our marriage. He had no idea, he had just handed me the evidence that would unravel everything. Richard had spent months designing the perfect ending to our marriage. What he never considered was that every perfect plan leaves behind imperfections. Arthur wasn't interested in dramatic speeches or emotional revenge. He wanted facts, documents, dates, transfers, signatures. If Richard had built his strategy on paperwork, then paperwork would be the thing that exposed him. Over the next 2 weeks, my life became strangely divided. During the day, I smiled through ordinary routines. I grocery shopped, folded laundry, answered Richard's casual questions over dinner, and pretended nothing had changed. At night, I met with Arthur. Every bank statement, every property record, every business filing became another piece of a puzzle Richard thought no one would ever assemble. The more we uncovered, the worse it became. One afternoon Arthur slid a stack of documents across his desk. "Take a look at this." I scanned the paperwork. 6 months earlier, Richard had quietly transferred a large percentage of ownership in the new office building into a holding company connected to Brooks and Hale Legal Group. Another page listed secondary operational authority. Vanessa Hale. I looked up slowly. She was involved from the beginning? Arthur gave a single nod. It certainly appears that way. The room suddenly felt colder. That office hadn't been built with Richard's money alone. Part of the investment had come from my mother's inheritance after she passed away. I remembered sitting at our kitchen table years earlier, sliding the check toward Richard while he insisted he could never accept it. "I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you," he'd promised. Now he was trying to use legal language to erase every trace of my contribution. The betrayal wasn't only personal anymore. It was calculated. Megan became my greatest source of strength. After exhausting 12-hour hospital shifts, she still found time to organize financial records, compare timelines, and help Arthur sort through hundreds of pages of documents. One evening our dining table disappeared beneath folders and legal files. She pointed to one transaction. "Dad moved this investment before he even mentioned divorce." Another. "This account was separated months ago." Then another. "He wasn't reacting to a failing marriage." She looked directly at me. "He was preparing an exit." That sentence lingered in my mind long after she went home. For months I'd blamed myself. Maybe I'd grown boring. Maybe I wasn't interesting enough anymore. Maybe getting older had simply made me easier to replace. Now I understood the truth. Richard hadn't been drifting away. He'd been organizing my removal. A few days later Arthur introduced me to Lydia Moreno, a forensic accountant with decades of experience uncovering financial manipulation. She was calm, precise, and impossible to impress. Within an hour she had already found irregular transfers that Richard assumed no one would question.
Couple years
She closed one folder
inside,
and looked at me.
let
"Your
you
husband
go
made a
for
serious
better,
mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "He became overconfident."
and you
She
wait for
explained that
me
several ownership changes,
to get off the plane and
business restructuring
remember.
decisions had been timed suspiciously close to the divorce paperwork.
And you're
They
thanking
looked
me
ordinary together.
for telling you
An
no,
entirely
'cause it
different story.
saved
And
you.
Lydia smiled for the first time. "If these records
But
become
I
public,"
gotta
she said, "his
know
professional reputation won't be the
you
only thing at
ever
risk." For the
wonder
first time
how
since
I
discovering the divorce
live,
documents,
or
he
am I
returned.
just
Not
part
because
of
I
your
wanted him, because I realized I wasn't powerless.
Am I your
Meanwhile,
answered
Richard
prayer?
behaved as though he were trying to become the perfect husband again. He brought
'Cause
home
my heart
expensive
is
dinners, asked polite questions, even
from
offered to
all the
replace the tires
love
on
you
my car
were
after noticing they looked worn.
taking.
Months earlier,
Exists
those
just to
gestures would
feel
have melted
your
my heart. Now they only made me
addiction.
wonder what it was he
Here,
was
take a
rehearsing.
little
Arthur had
more.
warned me. Manipulative people often become kinder right before they ask for something important.
And
He
you're
was right.
sober
Every
now.
smile now felt rehearsed.
That's what
Every
you told
compliment had been
me.
timed. Every act of kindness seemed designed to lower my guard before the grand opening.
You said I taught you
He
how
was restoring trust.
to
In
grow
reality,
into
he was confirming
something.
everything I'd already learned 3 nights before the event.
But
He
you're
intended another
35,
opportunity. Richard had
and you
fallen
still
asleep
throw
on the
it
couch while
back
watching
like a
financial
frat
news.
boy.
His phone vibrated beside him.
Oh,
Ronald
but
never left his
you'll
pocket.
be
This time he
someone,
was too exhausted to
'cause
notice.
we all
His
love a
screen went off.
man who
A message
finds
from
Jesus.
desk instead of speaking. He read every screenshot in silence. When he finished, he leaned back slowly. These messages change everything. And here's them. Oh, yes. His voice remained calm, but I noticed the faint smile. They reveal intent. He explained that the divorce itself wasn't the biggest issue anymore.
Cause my heart is
Something much darker.
from all the love you would take.
Public humiliation while
Exists just to feed your
every
addiction.
financial record,
You
and
take a
ownership
little
filed to a secure
more.
folder. Then he handed me a small flash drive. Everything is backed up.
Here.
I turned it over in my hand. It looked ordinary,
Take a little
small enough to
more.
disappear inside my purse. Yet inside it was months of lies, months of manipulation, months of proof. Arthur looked directly into my eyes. When Richard steps onto that stage, he said, he'll believe he's controlling the story. He paused. But the truth has a habit of rewriting endings. The night of the grand opening finally arrived. Snow had turned into freezing rain as downtown Chicago shimmered beneath thousands of city lights. Richard adjusted his cufflinks before leaving the house. "You'll wear the navy dress," he said casually. "It looks good in photographs." I smiled. Not because I agreed, because for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of the cameras anymore. Hidden safely inside my purse was the flash drive. Richard thought he was inviting me to witness the destruction of my life. He had no idea I was walking into that room prepared to expose his. The silence inside the law office became almost unbearable. Every pair of eyes was fixed on Richard. Only moments earlier, he had looked untouchable, a successful attorney celebrating the biggest milestone of his career. Now, tiny cracks were beginning to spread across the image he had spent years creating. He forced another smile. "Eleanor is emotional," he told the audience, trying to sound patient. "I'm sure everyone understands this is a difficult moment." A few awkward laughs echoed through the room. I shook my head. "No, Richard," I said calmly. "Being publicly erased is what's difficult." The room fell silent again. I slowly reached into my purse. Richard's eyes followed my hand instantly. For the first time all evening, genuine fear flashed across his face. "Eleanor," he said quietly. I ignored him. Instead, I walked toward the conference room's media system, where music had been playing only minutes earlier. No one tried to stop me. I inserted the flash drive. The speakers crackled. Then Richard's own voice filled the room. "She won't make a scene. She hates embarrassing herself." A wave of gasps swept across the audience. The next recording began immediately. Vanessa's voice. "Once she signs, everything transfers. After that, we can finally move on." Someone near the back whispered, "Oh my God." Several investors exchanged stunned looks. One judge slowly removed his glasses. A reporter raised his phone higher instead of lowering it. Richard rushed toward the sound system. "Turn that off." But it was too late. Another recording played. They discussed my inheritance. The lake house. Their plan to pressure me into signing before I had time to seek legal advice. Every polished smile in the room disappeared. Vanessa's confidence collapsed first. "Those conversations were private," she snapped. I looked directly at her. "No," I answered. "Those conversations revealed your intentions." Richard finally lost his composure. "You went through my phone." His words hung in the air. Not once had he denied what everyone had just heard. He only complained that I'd discovered it. That told the room everything it needed to know. Before anyone else could speak, Megan stepped forward. She looked straight at her father. "You stood here planning to humiliate Mom after everything she sacrificed for you." Richard opened his mouth. "Megan." "No." Her voice remained steady. "She worked 2 jobs while you chased your dream. She invested Grandma's inheritance into this firm. And this is how you repay her?" No one defended him. No one applauded. Even the guests who had laughed earlier now looked ashamed. I stepped beside Richard one last time. "For 31 years," I said quietly, I believed we were building a future together. I never imagined I was simply building one for you." Richard lowered his eyes. For the first time since I'd met him, he had nothing to argue. No clever legal language. No carefully rehearsed speech. Just silence. I gathered the divorce papers, folded them neatly, and handed them back. "I'm not signing anything tonight." Then I turned toward the elevators. Behind me, the celebration had completely fallen apart. The music never started again. The applause never returned. And for the first time in nearly a year, I no longer felt invisible. The morning after the grand opening felt strangely ordinary. Sunlight filtered through the blinds of the furnished condo Megan had helped me rent a few weeks earlier. Outside, Chicago traffic moved as if nothing extraordinary had happened the night before. But everything had changed. For the first time in months, I woke without wondering how I could save my marriage. Instead, I wondered how I was going to rebuild my life. The legal battle that followed wasn't quick. Richard hired one of the most respected divorce attorneys in the city, hoping to contain the damage. But once the recordings, financial records, ownership transfers, and hidden agreements became part of the case, the story changed completely. Arthur never raised his voice. He never tried to embarrass Richard in court. He simply presented facts. One document after another. One timeline after another, every piece fit together like a puzzle Richard had unknowingly built himself. The judge saw the pattern. Attempts to hide financial information. Property transfers connected to the law firm. The misleading addendum. The pressure campaign designed to force me into signing before I could seek legal advice. None of it looked like an honest divorce anymore. It looked calculated. After months of hearings and negotiations, the settlement was finalized. I kept my legal share of the office building. The retirement accounts were divided fairly. Most importantly, the lake house remained in my family. That place meant far more than money. It was where my father had taught Megan to fish. Where my mother spent quiet summer evenings watching sunsets over the water. Where generations of memories still lived. Richard never took that away from me. A few months later, Brooks and Hale Legal Group quietly began losing clients. No public scandal ever exploded across television. It didn't have to. In the legal world, trust is everything. Once people questioned Richard's integrity, referrals slowed. Important clients chose other firms. Business partners became distant. Vanessa resigned before the end of the year. Someone later told me she accepted a position in another state. I never tried to confirm it. By then, her future was no longer my concern. Mine was. One afternoon, while unpacking boxes in my new apartment, Megan picked up one of my old library name badges. She smiled. "You spent your whole life helping people find information." I laughed softly. "I suppose I did. So keep doing it." Those simple words changed everything. Not long afterward, I began volunteering at a local women's resource center. Many of the women who came through the doors reminded me of myself. Some had never handled the family's finances. Others didn't understand legal paperwork. Several believed asking questions would somehow make them seem difficult. I recognized that fear immediately. Week after week, I helped them organize financial documents, understand contracts, and ask the questions they had been afraid to ask. Slowly, my own confidence returned. I wasn't simply surviving anymore. I was useful again. Nearly 2 years later, I saw Richard one final time outside the courthouse. Winter wind swept through downtown Chicago as people hurried past carrying coffee cups and briefcases. He looked older. Not because of gray hair. Because regret had a way of changing a person's posture. He walked toward me cautiously. "How have you been?" I smiled. "Better." For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then he quietly asked, "Did you plan what happened that night?" I understood exactly what he meant. The recordings. The evidence. The public exposure. I thought carefully before answering. "No. I planned to protect myself." He looked down at the sidewalk. "I never thought you'd fight back." "I know." His eyes filled with sadness. Then came the question I never expected. Did you ever stop loving me? 31 years isn't something you erase overnight. Love doesn't disappear the same day trust does. I took a slow breath. There was a time when I loved you more than I loved myself. I paused. That was the real problem. He remained silent. But eventually, I continued, I remembered that I deserved the same loyalty I spent decades giving to someone else. Neither of us spoke again. He nodded once before turning and walking away into the crowd. I watched him disappear among strangers. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction. Simply with acceptance. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving someone else was wrong. It's finally remembering your own worth. If this story reminds you that dignity should never be traded for comfort, then carry that lesson with you. No matter your age. No matter how long you've stayed. No matter how impossible starting over may seem. You are never too old to choose yourself. And sometimes, the most powerful sentence you'll ever say isn't spoken in a courtroom. It's the quiet promise you make to yourself, I will never disappear just to make someone else comfortable again. The end.